Folks, you're with Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the attitudes of the Polish commentators, and there's a few vids doing the rounds on YouTube and elsewhere, where Polish commentators and supposed experts on demographics and the future direction that Poland should take in terms of immigration policy, and to just examine those and contrast them with the attitudes in the West. Now, just to sort of give a little bit of background here, this idea of births per woman and so the amount demographic crisis and that sort of thing. In isolation, the numbers tend not to mean very much. For example, there's a very high birth rate in Afghanistan, so a third world. But then you've got a dispersed rural population where everyone's marrying their cousins and brothers and sisters and getting married. And so there's, 5-6 children per woman. The average age in Afghanistan of the population, it's under 20 years old. I think it's like 19 or something. That's the average age, for goodness sakes. So it shows that people don't live very long there. And there are a lot of births to counter the amount of infant deaths and so on. Similarly, if your average age of the population is under 20, that would suggest or imply dynamism, but it also implies that there's a real problem in getting accrued knowledge and accrued expertise amongst the population. That's definitely a problem in Afghanistan and other Islamic republics, or any area with a high birth rate and a high death rate at the top end of things. They also have that inability to accrue sort of wisdom, knowledge, and capability. Coming to Poland, then, the birth rate in Poland is, well, it's nowhere near the 5 or 6 per woman in Afghanistan. The birth rate's 1.2, and this is thrown around as demographic crisis, Armageddon, apocalypse, and so on and so forth. On closer examination, isn't really. There's something in the order of 250 or 260,000 births each year in Poland, with a very low mortality rate, and all the kids nearly all of them are born healthy, and they'll grow up, and on balance they'll grow up to be good Polish citizens and so on. But the average age in Poland, I think, is 43 now. So it's very top heavy with older people. So once you take out the older people, as in the older women, women over the age of 50 or over the age of 40 or whatever, and then you look at the birth rate amongst younger women, then it holds up pretty well. It's easily at the replacement rate. But it's only by including the total population, which is top heavy with older people, that artificially skews the amount of births. And it looks like there's just not enough people being born. But given the average age is I think it's 43 in Poland. If you look at, say, women under the age of, say, women between the ages of 20 and 30, for example, then the birth rate holds up fairly well, and it doesn't look like there's a problem at all. It's only by including the older women in an age top heavy population that the numbers are skewed. So it's nowhere near as bad as it is, as bad as the demographic doomsayers. Now, the people that are pushing the demographic doomsayer scenario and narrative, they're the ones that are also pushing the mass migration. It's the only solution, no other solution. So we know already that the demographic catastrophists are really using the narrative to push their ideological position rather than chasing any particular solution. Now, in the communist era, because remember, Poland was under communist management from 1945 to 1990, 1991, I think it was, and not that they weren't sort of pushing and shoving, the Lech Walesa and all, those people were pushing for change in terms of how much control the Soviet government in Moscow had over Poland, and was Poland just a flunky satellite, or was it a self-governing nation? Poland as a nation has existed on and off very, very, very intermittently over the years. going back into medieval times, there was the Kingdom of Poland and Lithuania, for goodness sakes. But Poland has very frequently been just gobbled up by the Germanic powers in the west, and the Russian powers in the east, and it has often not existed at all. This has been carved up between the two. Even during the Napoleonic time, Poland existed as the Grand Duchy of Warsaw, as the French government named it at the time. So coming back to the demographics and so the solution that's put forward is, well, we've got to have migration, and that's the only way Poland can survive. Now, I don't accept that as an argument, by the way, but let's just follow that one through and see where it goes. Now, at the same time as a lot of these Polish commentators are talking about, well, we need migration, the Poles in particular place an emphasis on immigrants that will assimilate and integrate. With Poland, we have our culture with the Polish people, the Polish land, and we don't, throughout history, we've had it taken from us, and we've had the ideological fanatics of the Soviet Union controlling us for 50 years. So we want our own country, our own culture, and we want to protect it. And that's quite reasonable, by the way, nothing wrong with that at all. There are those who might say, that's racism and that's fascism. Bullshit. It's an independent people asserting their independence and their sovereignty, and there is nothing wrong with that at all. Now, in terms of the immigrants that they select or want to select, or the commentators, and this surprised me, this caught me by surprise, even the most ardent commentators, or amongst the most ardent, where they would say Poland is dying and we're falling to it's Armageddon and so on, birth rate's so low, Poland will be gone in the next 5 minutes if we don't get migrants and so on. Even those people still say that we only want to accept migrants, or they should be given absolute priority, migrants that will integrate. Now, this is a problem for Poland, assuming you accept this, because Poland's population is, 36, 37 million, something like that at the moment, I think. And at the rate that they're going, the older people will be dying off, and they're not working anyway. It's top heavy with people over the age of 70, and they'll be dying off. Obviously, natural sort of attrition. They'll be dying off. So the demographics of Poland will change, whereas the average age will start to become much younger and fairly quickly. So then the birth rates that exist amongst, the younger average populace, the birth rates will be fine. And so the population would drop to, say, 32 million. But remember, those are older people who aren't working, aren't consuming anyway. So the idea that these are hardworking people toiling on the land or something, that's bullshit. So we just remember those numbers as we go on here with this essay. But what are the countries that the Polish say, well, we need migration? So they talk about the adjacent, this shares a border with Poland, the country of Belarus. Now, the population in Belarus is about 9 or 10 million. But then the birth rates in Belarus are about, give or take, about the same as Poland. In Lithuania, which is a small country with a population of about 3 million, they've got more or less similar birth rates again, so low birth rates. And then there's Ukraine with a population of, I think, about 38, 39 million. And that's got artificially low birth rates at the moment because of the conflict. But even putting that conflict aside, the population, the birth rate in Ukraine still was around the same. So in that entire region, Poland, Lithuania, Belarus, Ukraine, and even if you look at the border areas of, say, Czechia and Slovakia and those sort of places, the birth rates are in that same order, 1.2 to 1.4, that sort of range. They're a little bit better in Hungary, but the government's working pretty hard to provide incentives for people to procreate. So none of the countries around Poland really are A, populous, and B, themselves have a high birth rate. So But if you look at the list of people that the Polish, the immigration authorities and these pundits say, well, the migrants that most easily and quickly integrate into Poland are people that speak that Slavic language of the area, which is again Belarus and Ukraine. So if we look at the the people around the border areas with Poland, again, Belarus, Lithuania, and Ukraine. Look at the people around those border; they could assimilate pretty easily. The refugees that have come from Ukraine that have been temporarily, housed and given refugee status in Poland, they, in the main, I'm sure there are exceptions, they integrate fairly well. But there's no, if we look at the surplus populations of the world in the places like the Afghanistans and the Bangladeshs and the Pakistans and the Nigeria and so on, if we look at the surplus populations, that's not, those people won't integrate, so the Polish say. So those people don't integrate, it takes way too long. India and everything, they don't integrate at all. They form ghettos and so on. And they've seen the results of mass migration of Africans and Indians and so on to places like the UK and France and, of course, Germany being right next door. Now, at the same time, the Polish say, well, the migration coming from the wealthier countries where they've got a pretty decently well-functioning system, or they've got a wealthy country. Germany's a wealthy, it's a great deal wealthier than Poland. The Czech Republic and Slovakia and so on, they're doing pretty good in the overall scheme of things. So there's no real incentive for those people to move to Poland for a better life. And maybe that some people want to move to Poland because it's primarily white and Christian. That could be an incentive. But the idea of people moving for economic reasons, then Ukraine and Belarus, not so much Lithuania, but Ukraine and Belarus would move to get a better life because Poland's a better managed economy. There's less corruption. Belarus and Ukraine is corrupt as fuck. But if you look at if there is migration, decent scale migration from Belarus and Ukraine to Poland, then the problem of a demographic crisis of that overall region, all you do is move the problem around, because Ukraine's got that problem, Belarus has got that problem, Lithuania's got the problem. All in that area, But during the Soviet years, people were encouraged, not encouraged necessarily, the communist years, they had to work some shit job at some shit factory that they didn't want to. Everybody hated it and it was all a waste of time. It was all bullshit. And you're always getting into trouble. If you arrived late 3 times in a month or something, you could go to prison. It was a tough gig. So women were effectively encouraged to have children. This is indirectly encouraged to have children because the first 12 months or sometimes 2 years of following the birth, they could stay to look after the child or children and receive some sort of state benefits, to do that. So women were having children not because they wanted children per se, but because it was a good way of avoiding going to work. Similarly, if they had a relative over a certain age that wasn't well, they could also then take extended time off to supposedly or allegedly look after the ill or the sick relative. So this created a lot of perverse incentives for procreation and then keeping your relatives alive so you could avoid going to work or working in the factory. Now those gone, the incentives now have gone into reverse, where because of cost of living and because the state doesn't give you the benefits now, you need to go to work. And because the state doesn't give you the benefits now, you need to go to work to make ends meet. And so there's now a disincentive for procreation, and that's something that needs to sort itself out over time. But what was interesting in particular was the Polish, certainly the commentators that I saw at least, saying, no, we want migration, but only people that integrate. But that's a problem because in that region, as I've just mentioned, the people that the Poles believe are most likely to integrate and most likely to want to come to Poland, Poland being a more vibrant economy, they're also from areas that have low birth rates and low population density. So you look at the population density of Germany as versus Poland. The population density in Germany is almost double what it is in Poland. So this brings us back to the Western situation in, whether it be Australia or Britain or wherever, Germany. When you're selecting migrants or taking in refugees, it doesn't matter. Are you selecting migrants that add value to your economy? Now, typically, Australia, for the most part, it wasn't perfect, by the way, but for the most part, Australia was accepting migrants and choosing migrants and approving migrants who were skilled. They spoke English, they could contribute, they could walk straight into a job. From day one, they could come off the boat or the plane and pretty much get employment within days, this sort of thing. And if they didn't speak English well, there was free English classes, almost compulsory, and they'd give you like a hostel type housing and help to get you go for interviews at factories for jobs, things like that. Now, in the case of, say, the Greek Civil War, when the communists were trying to do a takeover in I think it was the 1950s, the Australian government, unwisely in my view, took in a lot of rural Greek peasants into Australia, and those people 3 generations on still haven't really integrated. They still call themselves Greek and refer to themselves as Greek, and they read Greek newspapers and get all fired up about political issues in Greece, even now, even though they're the grandchildren of the people who came over. So I think that's an example of a very modestly successful immigration program there. But for the most part, the immigrants were coming from Western Europe, Britain or I don't know, Sweden and Denmark and Germany and so on, and they all of them integrated very quickly and with skills. They learned English and so on and so forth. So this is what the Polish folks are going on about here. These people from the area will integrate quickly. They've already got similar languages. They've already got, they're Christian and so on. Now, Ukraine and Belarus are a corrupt basket case, whereas Poland, by comparison, is pretty good on the corruption scale. So that's an issue maybe of concern there. Mafia-style corruption rings coming in, but overall, the Polish position is I think, a sensible one. Whereas in Australia and the West generally, and particularly the Anglo-English speaking sphere, the immigration has been based on where are the population surpluses in the world, not where are the people who are based on where are the population surpluses in the world, not where are the people who are most likely to integrate. And therefore, the West has adopted a policy that is going to be and is already in motion one of the most horrible migration type failures ever seen in history. And it's we're living through it right now. Whereas the Poles have a much more sensible migration policy, I would argue, but they're in a situation where all the countries around them, the best supply of migrants, also have low birth rates, and that's going to need to work itself out. You've been a Tacitus today, your Pushback Channel. Thank you for listening.